Hello, I wanted to talk about some of the purchases that I've made, gear purchases that I'm generally really happy with and, I'd recommend to other people. There's plenty of stuff I bought over the years that I regret buying, so, or at least I've not ended up being that happy with. So I'd like to do a video maybe in the future where I talk about some of that stuff, but for this video, I'm going to focus on stuff that I'm really happy with that I bought. For this video, we're just going to talk about some stuff. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started with the instrument that I've got in front of me. So I bought this just recently. I was in the market for a new acoustic guitar, a new guitar specifically for recording. So for context, I've got a couple of Martins, my main one being my Martin D17M, which is, like a £2,000 guitar. So it's not cheap. And it's a lovely guitar, don't get me wrong. It sounds great, but Martins can be tricky to record. And I find that particularly with my D17M, it doesn't have a ton of projection. So I think it's quite reliant on being in a really good sounding room that maybe is, has a fair amount of liveliness to it for the guitar to really sing and sound natural and record well. So I wanted a guitar that was going to sort of naturally project a bit more. My main live room is very small. I've had to heavily acoustically treat it, so it's quite dead sounding, which means that it's not the best space for recording acoustic instruments like acoustic guitar. I wanted to buy more of a versatile all-rounder guitar that was going to play well finger-picked, play well strummed, was going to work well in different tunings. And sort of the gold standard for this really is the Gibson J45, classic recording guitar. But I didn't have the money for that. That's a couple of grand. So I was looking for something similar, but cheaper, which doesn't always work out. Sometimes you just need to buy the thing. But in this case, I did some Googling, I watched a lot of YouTube videos, and eventually came across this brand, Alvarez. I'd never heard of them before, but turns out they make really affordable acoustic guitars that are all solid wood, so no laminates anywhere. And they do a lot of different models, from dreadnoughts to parlor style guitars. But this is the MD60, if I remember right. It's Sitka spruce top, and I think it's Indian rosewood back and sides. It might be mahogany somewhere, but I'm pretty sure it's rosewood. Yeah, it's a lovely guitar. It's a good all-rounder. I think it has a similar kind of sound to the J45. I'll give it a little play for you, give you an idea of what it sounds like. It's in an open tuning at the moment, daggad. But yeah, this is the guitar. Yeah, great sounding guitar, records really well, works well for a variety of different genres, strumming or finger picked, has a nice body, nice projection to it, just overall, sounds pretty well balanced, and has a nice voicing in the mid-range. Yeah, and I really like it. It looks lovely as well, it looks the part. Great finish. I don't love that the headstock on the front is gloss. That looks a little cheap to me. I prefer satin finish on the headstock, but that's nitpicky. I don't love the Alvarez logo as well. I think that looks a little naff, but it's fine. It's generally a nice looking guitar. These retail around £600, which I think, for an all solid wood guitar that sounds as good as this does, great value for money. And they come with a pickup installed as well. So an under saddle pickup. You got your controls here, just inside the sound hole. It's an LR Bags pickup. I've not used it, so I can't comment on what it sounds like. I imagine it sounds fine. You know, I imagine it's not one of their best pickups, but I'm sure it sounds, you know, absolutely fine if you want to take this out and play live with it plugged in. But for me, you know, I'm just recording with it. I doubt I'll ever use for pickups, so that didn't really sort of inform my purchase. But yeah, great guitar, very happy with it. Next up is my Yamaha MLA8 8-channel preamp. That's a bit of a mouthful, but I needed some more mic preamps basically, and I needed a fairly, you know, an inexpensive way of doing that. I wanted another 8 mic preamps to bump up my preamp count when I'm recording kind of multiple things at the same time, particularly with drums. I went looking on Facebook Marketplace and looking, you know, places you can buy stuff secondhand. Came across this. I think I paid £150 for it, and I see these go generally around that price. You can't buy them new anymore. They're long since discontinued. If I remember right, these preamps, they're based on the same ones from Yamaha's DM2000 digital mixing console. So good quality preamps, you know, solid state. There's no valves or anything going on here, so there's not loads of color. They're relatively transparent and clean sounding. But that was what I wanted. I just wanted some general sort of workhorse preamps. So, you know, I figured I couldn't go too far wrong. Yamaha, generally a good brand. The preamps being out of one of their flagship consoles, even though it's one of their older consoles. Their preamps in their digital mixers have generally always been good quality. So I decided to give it a go and buy it. And honestly, I was actually pleasantly surprised at how much I've come to love this preamp, particularly with drums, which was great because that was kind of what I bought it for. You know, that's when I'm recording multiple things at once. That's usually drums. It sounds great. You know, it is clean sounding. It doesn't have a ton of color or character. They're just very musical sounding, and have a nice sort of transient response that I just like on my drum mics. It always seems to respond well to them. It's very utilitarian, so you know, you just have a gain control on each channel, pad, high pass filter, and phantom power individually on each channel, which is quite handy. Yeah, there's no output control on each preamp, which sometimes can be an issue. You know, you might want to trim the output, but drive that input gain harder. Generally, you know, for what I'm using it for, I've not found that to be an issue. That would more be with maybe something like vocals or quieter sources, where maybe, yeah, you need to bump up the output gain a bit more, but you don't want to drive the input too hard and have the input start distorting. I've not really found you can drive these particularly hard. I mean, I've never really tried to, but yeah, they're just good sounding preamps. I'd recommend this unit to anybody, especially at the current sort of price you can buy it for. So yeah, check out the Yamaha MLA8. Next is another relatively recent purchase, my Kali Audio in 8 monitors. I was using prior to this the Alesis Monitor 1 Mark IIs, which served me well for years. I know it's, you know, some people will kind of hate on them because they're cheaper budget studio monitors, but honestly, in the rooms that I was in the past, I did loads of great mixes on them, and I always liked the sound of them. Mixes always translated pretty well. But then when I came to this place, I found that those Alesis monitors just didn't work that well in this room for whatever reason. So I found myself wanting to upgrade my monitors. And again, you know, I was looking at sort of a budget option. I looked into the Kalis and I came across the In8s. And honestly, you know, a lot of people I think have already talked a lot about these monitors and have said kind of what's needed to be said about them, but they're just great monitors for the money. What are they? I think they're about £800 a pair, if I'm right. It's something in that ballpark. I can't remember what I paid for them. But for that kind of money for a freeway design, there's nothing else in that price bracket that I'm aware of that, that has that level of design. That's a three-way monitor. And yeah, they just sound really good. Mixes translate well on them. They've got a very fast transient response, which is great. They're not overly fatiguing, again, so you can listen to on them for extended periods. They seem to work well in this room. I do use room correction EQ. That it really is just because of this room being what it is, being very small and needing more than acoustic treatment can do in this room. If you're looking at any sort of budget below like $1,000 or below, get the Callies. No question. I don't think there's anything else, certainly that I've used and heard, that sound as good as these do in that kind of price bracket. Back to instruments. This is a very recent purchase. I bought this literally the other week. It's a Marcus Miller Sire V7 bass guitar, obviously. I was using, I had a Yamaha RBX something or other bass guitar, which I've had since my early teens. I think, I bought that secondhand for like £50 or something. And I'd upgraded the pickups on it with Seymour Duncans. And, it was a fine, like Yamaha make great instruments and that bass played really nicely. It was a nice bass to play, but it just didn't sound that good, even with upgrading the pickups. And then it had some problems with the wiring, where the tone control wasn't working anymore. And, it had kind of served its purpose, I think. For a long time, I had my mind set on getting a Fender P-Bass, because, it's just a classic sort of standard recording bass guitar. That kind of tone is just all over so many records. But the Marcus Millers, I know a few people who own these, and so I'd played some of them before and heard them plenty. And you can get that kind of P-bass tone, but they're also way more versatile than that. They feel great to play. It looks just nice looking bass guitar. I don't love the headstock design on them, but it's fine. It doesn't really matter. What matters most is what it sounds like. You've got active circuitry with the pickups. There is a selector to switch between passive and active, so you can go passive if you want to. You have a whole ton of tonal control here. You've got dual pots on some of these. I still haven't even figured out entirely what all of these do yet. I think the dual pots, you've got volume for each pickup. You've got tone controls with like your treble, your mids and your bass, but you have a sweep with the on the dual pots for, I think, the adjacent EQ control. I've only recorded a little bit with it so far, but it sounds great. It's really versatile in terms of tone options, so perfect for recording with. As a studio bass guitar, I think you can't go too far wrong, especially at the price point. I bought this secondhand, around £300. It does need a bit of setup work. I found it's got, a bit of fret buzzing on some of the higher frets. I think the action just needs to be adjusted a bit. The intonation is fine, but it's not perfect. So I'm gonna have some setup work done on it. But yeah, new, they're about £400, which, yeah, £400 for a quality recording bass guitar that's versatile in its sort of tonal options. You can't argue with that, really. So I'd highly recommend the Marcus Miller V7 if you're in the market for a new bass guitar for recording. Continuing sort of on the guitar trend, next up is the Marshall JCM 900 guitar head, which I've got sitting over here. I bought this a fair while ago now. I think I paid about £800 for it secondhand, with the matching 4x12 cabinet. Yeah, the JCM 800 is sort of the really famous Marshall head, but you'd also be surprised at how many records you will have heard the JCM 900 on. And I've used it a ton on all the recordings that I've done since I've had it. It's a pretty versatile amp, I think. It's good if you're doing sort of indie rock, hard rock, that sort of thing. I don't really record metal, so I can't comment too much on how good it is for that. But I'd imagine you could do metal guitar tones with it fairly well. It's maybe not the best head for that, but it can do, it can sort of go into that distortion territory, that more high gain kind of thing, if you want to take it there. I think where it's best is where you're just sort of driving on the A channel, driving the preamp fairly hard so that you get some natural breakup. It just sounds nice. It kind of drives in a nice way. It's got a good amount of tonal options. I'm a fan of, when it comes to distortion, just getting natural breakup and not necessarily relying on guitar pedals too much. It's just an amp that sounds good, cranked up loud. And if you stick a 57 or whatever in front of it, it's going to sound good. So yeah, for that sort of classic, rock guitar tone or anything in the sort of indie rock territory, you can't go too far wrong with this amp head, especially with the matching 4x12 Marshall cabinet. Next up is the Bifale BF414. You'll find these sort of under a few different names, but if you can find this exact one, because I believe there are some differences across the different variations of this mic, I would try and find this one if you're going to get it. There are a few different capsule sizes. So this is the 34mm, which is the larger capsule size, which is generally what people say to go for and what I went for. So I can't comment on the smaller capsule size. I kept hearing about these from channels on YouTube. Unfortunately, I can't show you the actual mic itself at the moment because it's, rigged up on overhead duties on my drum kit at the moment. And I don't really want to take it down. I kind of have my overheads mounted from the ceiling permanently up there. I've got a pair of these, and they've become my main pair of overhead mics for drums. As you can probably tell, this is based, at least for the design of the mic, is based on the AKG C414. It doesn't sound anything like a 414. I've got a 414 as well, and they sound completely different. So it's definitely not trying to be a clone of the 414. And it's cardioid only, so it's not, it doesn't do multiple pickup patterns. I kept hearing people rave about this mic specifically, but the Bifale mics in general, particularly because they're so cheap. I can't remember what I paid for this exactly. I know they do fluctuate in price a bit. When they first hit the market, they were cheaper than I even bought mine for, but I'm pretty sure for a pair of these, I paid under £100, which is kind of nuts. If you're going to get a microphone that resembles like anything remotely good. So, for a mic that actually sounds good, to get a pair of mics that you can use, as drum overheads or for a pair of mics on acoustic guitar or, wherever you might want to use a pair of microphones. Yeah, it sounds really nice. It's not overly hyped anywhere, as a lot of cheaper Chinese condensers often are. They're hyped in the top end somewhere. Probably won't be able to see this that well, but there's a frequency response chart there. Yeah, I don't know how accurate that is, but I'd say, that's somewhere about, where I'd sort of correlate with the sound that I'm familiar with it, where, it's, maybe a little sort of recessed in the upper mids and the lower mids. It's got a fair amount of body in that kind of area. I just find it works well on drum overheads. I haven't really used them for much more than that. I don't think. I think I've recorded piano with them once, and the results were fine from what I remember. But pretty much since I've had them and I stuck them up on drum overheads, they've just stayed there, and I don't use them for anything else. Yeah, overall, I can't fault the sound of them. Are there better mics out there? probably. But for the money, every now and then these cheaper mics come along and people buy into the hype and they start raving about them. I bought an Aston Origin, which I've got behind me. I've got one of those, and the Aston Spirits. I kind of bought into the hype on those mics, and although they're fine, I've never been crazy about them, and I think they're about worth what you pay for them. Whereas I'd say the BF 414 kind of punches above its weight and is worth having, as an option in your studio. So yeah, I did buy as well the other box. Again, I do actually have this mic to hand somewhere, but I've got the box immediately to hand, so I'll show you the box. The Bifale V5, so out of all the Bifale mics that I listened to online, listening to demos, these two were sort of the winners for me. This one is more expensive than the 414. I think this was like around, I'm going to say £120, something like that. I don't love this one. It's fine. I haven't used it a ton. I found it's quite nice on piano. I do find this one, there's something in the top end which just sounds a little artificial to me, and it's a bit hyped in the top end, not like in a nice airy way, but in like a slightly sort of brittle way. It has a nice sound in the upper mids. I quite like, it's quite like forward in that area, which on the right source can sound really nice. So on the right vocal, I could see it being a good mic. I think every mic does have a purpose somewhere. I've just not really found the purpose for this one yet, but I don't regret buying it. I probably wouldn't buy it again if I could rewind time, whereas I would buy the 414 again. So I'd recommend those definitely if you're looking for an affordable pair of mics or even a single mic. Yeah, check them out. You can find them on AliExpress. If you go on Amazon, they'll be more expensive, but yeah, AliExpress is where you'll find them the cheapest. Sticking on the theme of microphones, this is the Behringer BA19A boundary mic. So kick drum mic primarily, as these sort of microphones have become known for. I have a Sennheiser E901, which I use, most of the time in the studio. That sort of always lives inside the kick drum of my drum kit. My studio kit lives inside there as the kick-in mic. I prefer the sound of the E901. It's the better mic. It's better than this, definitely. The thing I do find with boundary mics, though, in general, is they're very moldable. And to be honest, I found, between this, the Shure Beta 91A, and the Sennheiser E901. Also, more recently, I've come to use the I can't remember what it's called, but SE, the boundary mic that they brought out fairly recently. They're all pretty similar sounding, and they're all pretty moldable in terms of EQ. They take EQ very well, and you can EQ them a lot, without them sounding sort of unnatural. By nature, anyway, of using them on something like a kick drum, the way we tend to EQ kick drums and stuff is quite like accentuated anyway, and not necessarily the most natural sounding thing. But yeah, I found there's not much difference in them, and these retail around £60. If I was going to choose between the Shure Beta 91A, which is sort of the classic boundary mic, I would pick this. Save your money. Like, honestly, this is as good as, exactly the same kind of sound. It's built like a tank, has a kind of cool LED light, so when you plug it in and give it phantom power, this ring around the XLR connector lights up blue, which you may or may not like. I think it's kind of cool. I mean, you can't see it anyway when it's inside a kick drum. But yeah, for £60, you got the same switch that you have on pretty much all these boundary mics, where you can change it between flat, or more of a low mid scoop, I would choose it over a Beta 91A. And the main reason I bought it was the Sennheiser E901. As good as it is, it has kind of a wider shape on the top here, which means that depending on the size of the port on the kick drum, you can't actually always fit it inside. That's not a problem on my drum kit, but when I'm recording other kits, sometimes that's an issue. If it is, I'll use this. Yeah, Behringer, £60. I'd recommend it. Vic Firth over-ear headphones, closed back. I think there are a few different models of these. Yeah, I bought these fairly recently, mainly for drummers when they're tracking. I wanted something that just offered a good level of isolation. The other tracking headphones I have aren't quite as isolated as these, and also these are like pretty comfy. They feel quite comfortable, and it feels like you could wear them for an extended period of time without them getting uncomfortable, which can often be the case with a lot of over-ear headphones. I got these secondhand from a charity shop. I think I paid £30 for them. So that, was a bit of a steal. I think new, they're around the sort of £100 mark. Even for that money, I'd recommend these. Do they sound the best? No. I certainly wouldn't mix with these. I wouldn't necessarily use them as a pair of headphones when you're miking stuff up, as a recording set of cans. If you're trying to find good mic positions and stuff, because they're not particularly flat sounding. Yeah, they're fairly scooped sounding, a little kind of pokey sounding at the same time as well. But yeah, I've had no complaints from drummers. I think they sound fine. They sound good even. They're just not the most natural or flat sounding pair of headphones. So, not really what you'd want for mixing or as a tracking pair of headphones trying to find. But as a tracking pair for musicians, for drummers, or wherever you just want like a good level of isolation, I don't think these would necessarily be the best for singers. But for drummers, which is what they're primarily designed for, I think, Vic Firth is a drum brand. Yeah, they're good. They drive well, as in I can't remember what the impedance is on these, but you don't need an overly powerful headphone amp to drive these. Any interface headphone amp will work fine with them. If you can find them cheap or a decent price new, I would definitely recommend them. Next is my pair of Klark Teknik, let me get this right, 76 KT. I always think of them as the KT 76s, but it's the other way around apparently. Based on the 1176. If you weren't aware, you could probably guess that already. It's an 1176 clone. I was always interested in these when they first hit the market, but more recently Behringer dropped the price on like a load of their pro audio kit. And these went down to, at least in the UK, you can buy these new for around £140, which, for an outboard compressor, even halfway decent, £140 is kind of nuts. Like, for what you're getting is pretty insane. So as soon as that price drop happened, I bit the bullet and just went ahead and purchased two. Honestly, I've been pleasantly surprised with these. I've used them a fair bit, both in tracking and in mixing. So on a snare drum, bass guitar, I've tried a fair few times and I've ended up not using it. It's not quite clicked for me. But kick drum, snare drum, great. Also, any kind of sort of rock vocal, I've used it on a few vocals I've recorded to great success. It sounded awesome. I don't think I've used them on guitars at all. Actually, I lie. I think I have used them on acoustic guitar once, just a bit of light compression, and that sounded cool. So far with my experience, I'd say definitely kick drum, snare drum. Even if that's all you're going to use it for, and maybe the odd bit of vocals on the right vocal, for what you pay for them, it's great. Even just, even if it was just a good snare compressor, I would pay that money for that. It does the 1176 thing. It does it pretty well. It does the all buttons in mode. It sounds cool. It does the thing that an 1176 does when you do the all buttons in mode. I've heard various comparisons. Present Day Productions did an amazing video on 1176s in general and compared a whole bunch of the different clones and the original models. And you'd be surprised at like how little difference there is in the various clones. Don't get me wrong, like there are better ones out there for sure. And, if I have the money, I probably would buy one of the current, actual UA ones. But for what you pay, I just don't think you can go wrong. Honestly, I'd recommend them to anybody especially if you're looking for your first outboard compressor. Grab a pair of these. £140 each. That's £280 for a pair of compressors that can be used on a whole bunch of things. If you wanted like a really versatile outboard compressor, then something like a distressor would probably be the way to go. But then again, you're talking about a much, much bigger spend then. So yeah, I'd definitely recommend the 76 KTs. Going back to instruments, I'm going to talk a bit about the SD reed organ that I bought a little while ago, earlier this year. This was something that I'd seen on one of my random, I browse Facebook Marketplace probably way more than I should. I'd been interested in reed organs for a little while. I think I'd just seen some videos of people playing them, and I don't know, they have such a cool, unique sound. If you've not heard one before, go check out some videos of some old reed organs. They sound really cool. They're all mechanical, so no electrics involved, so a fully acoustic instrument, and mechanically really interesting. The engineering behind those kind of old instruments is fascinating, and they're so beautifully built. I saw this on Facebook Marketplace. It looks really cool and I was very intrigued by it, but I decided I wasn't going to impulse buy it. And then I kind of forgot about it. And I think it was 6 months later, I was on Facebook Marketplace again, and I saw it on there still. I kind of saw it as, this must be fate. I saw it as a sign. I messaged the seller and I went over to view it. It has some issues. I mean, it's over 100 years old. On the pedals on it, the straps that then move the bellows and pump air into the bellows. The straps need replacing because they're quite worn down, and when they get worn down, they start to become noisy. So yeah, it's very noisy when you operate the pedals. The reeds themselves, it's relatively in tune with itself, but the whole thing, if I remember right, is either a little flat or sharp, which is common for an instrument of its type and of its age. That's something I probably won't be able to fix, at least without way more expense than it would be worth. And there are very few people out there these days, at least in the UK, repairing these kind of organs that are knowledgeable enough to tune the reeds. From a little I know, it involves actually physically filing down the reeds. So it's something that you only have one shot at, and you've got to get right. And then is only going to last so long before they go out of tune again. And yeah, it might cost me thousands of pounds to repair, which is just more money than it would be worth spending on, especially because it's something that doesn't really have much practical use in terms of recording. Being realistic, how often is it that I'm going to get a project that I'm working on where either me or the client goes what this song needs is some reed organ. Don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful sounding instrument, but it's not kind of a right fit for a lot of modern music. If I did record it, if I can get it to the point where the pedals are quiet and it doesn't have too much mechanical noise, if it's in tune with itself, you could then adjust the pitch on the recording to match it being in tune with everything else that you've recorded. But it's just a nice character piece to have here. Like every time I have a client in, people always comment on it. You know, it looks beautiful. It is a beautiful instrument, and people like to, you know, have a little play on it. So even if it never gets recorded, I've got something that's a piece of history. Unfortunately, quite often instruments like that do end up just being scrapped, broken down and thrown away. And so, you know, this way, at least it's somewhere where it's being kept alive and in some sort of working state. I'll try and do what I can to it, but yeah, beyond that, you know, it's not really worth spending any money on. But yes, it's just a lovely piece of history. So yeah, a couple more bits to go through. Next up is my Bart HRK MPQ 568C. MPQ 568C. I had to look at the actual unit to remember that. It's a 500 series preamp, and it is not just a microphone preamp. It actually utilizes the DIY RE color card format. It has 2 color card slots in it. If you don't know what color cards are, basically it was a format that DIY RE invented, and they're these little PCBs that you can put on or in compatible bits of equipment, often 500 series kit. DIY RE themselves make 500 series color card units. Essentially, color cards are like little pieces of outboard, but just on these tiny PCBs. Very cool format, where you could get a whole variety of different things, you know, from compressors to EQs to saturation type units. There's all sorts. You know, if you do a Google look on DIY RE's site and other places, there are other people that make color cards now, and it's a really cool format to get into, and like a you know, sort of fairly inexpensive way of getting into adding some hardware outboard sounds to your kit. I was in the market for another preamp, particularly something that was going to be really good for vocals, and this preamp generally I'd say is a very good vocal preamp with a few caveats, but it's good in the sense that it has a lot of gain, so you know you can drive almost any mic with it. And not only does it have a lot of gain, it also has a lot of clean gain, which is really important. So it's a very clean, I'd say like 3-dimensional sounding preamp. Like it just, I don't know, it just seems to bring things forward in a way that's very pleasing. I've always really liked the sound of the preamp itself, but the added bonus is that it's got the color card slot. So along with it, I bought 2 color cards. One is an LA4 style compressor. So when I'm tracking vocals through this preamp, I'll put a touch of the LA4 compression in. With the second color card slot, I have a German console, I believe it's called, which is like a saturation distortion type thing. It's okay. Like every time I come to put that in, it never really works. It's not a very pleasing distortion. But the LA4 compressor I love, and I love the preamp itself. The preamp also has 2-band EQ on it, which each band, so there's a high frequency and a low frequency band. I believe they're bell curves, not shelves. There's a switch where you can change the frequency. So I think the high frequency one is like 6K or 12K, and I can't remember what the low frequency band is. It's like 80 hertz and maybe 160, something like that. But yeah, so it's a very versatile preamp. Lots of gain, clean gain. The EQ control is nice, just for, you know, adding a touch of flavor to things you might be recording with it. Having the color card slots is really cool because you can then, you know, add some outboard to your signal path. So as a sort of cheap way, I suppose, and a footprint efficient way of building a vocal chain, say, you could have that preamp with a compressor and then, you know, some kind of saturation or color or additional EQ. You could build a nice vocal chain that way with those 2 color card slots. So really, really good preamp all round. The only downside to it, and the only thing I don't like about it, is the fact that it doesn't have any output. level. You can't trim the output if you need to. You also can't add more output level. The input gain itself, there's a switch to high gain, which then adds additional gain. And I find that the preamp comes to life most when you have that high gain button engaged, at least to my ears. The problem with that is that if you're recording a really loud singer, you end up driving the input too hard and you start to get unwanted distortion. With a singer that's quieter, you're recording softer vocals, this preamp can be amazing. But with louder vocalists, I often find it's quite hard to get the right balance. You're either in that high gain territory where it starts distorting on certain louder passages, or you come out of the high gain and you've not got quite enough gain, to the point where the signal you've got coming into your door is too low, which can make it difficult when monitoring for tracking. I suppose post-recording you could then adjust your clip gain or whatever to add makeup gain, but it's still a bit annoying even then. And my workaround for it is when I'm in that territory of needing to have the gain lower on the preamp, I use the makeup gain in the compressor in RME Total Mix. I have an RME interface, so I use RME Total Mix effects for my headphone monitoring. Each input, each channel has an EQ and compressor on it, so I just use the makeup gain without actually engaging the compressor, but I just use makeup gain to just add some clean gain and raise that output level more when the input level is too quiet. So that's something to bear in mind. This particular preamp is discontinued now, and you don't often see them on the second-hand market. So yeah, I can recommend the Bart HRK color preamp. So last but not least is something that's not strictly audio related, and that is my Atem Mini Pro ISO. I've gotten so much use out of it. It's been such great value for money. For what you get for the money is incredible. So if you don't know, it's essentially a video switcher. There's a HDMI and SDI version. I have the HDMI one. So you have 4 HDMI inputs and you can switch between those on the fly. And there's various things with cutting between camera shots that you can do, where you can do different types of fades and transitions and stuff. You also have audio input, so you can send audio into it. You have 2 line or mic channels, but they're on mini jack and you can switch it between line and mic level. I've used it for doing like live video sessions and stuff. They're great for podcasting, which is one of the main things I think a lot of people use them for. I use it these days in my studio for I have cameras, so one here in the control room, one in the live room, and one in the vocal booth slash amp booth. I have cameras in each one of those rooms because I don't have any windows in the studio, and the layout of these rooms anyway, even if I did put a window like through from the control room, there wouldn't be anywhere I could put a window through into the live room where I'd actually be able to see anything useful. And the expense of it, the cost of doing that kind of thing and doing it properly and doing it well to where it's not going to be like acoustically detrimental, yeah, it's not really worth it, especially when I rent this space. I don't really want to do any major structural changes like that when but I'm investing a lot of my own money in when I'm renting this place, and one day I'm sure I won't be here. So any money I put into this building itself, I'm not going to be able to sort of take that with me, which, as long as whilst you're in a space, like if you're making money from a space, sometimes it's worth doing structural stuff because it pays for itself in that way, because yeah, you're actively getting business from space. But anyway, point is, I couldn't put any windows in the rooms to be able to see musicians when I'm recording, when I'm in here in the control room. So I put in cameras. The Atem Mini is a great way of sort of interfacing all those cameras. I've got a TV. You can see my face on it right now, which is this camera that's on me. So it gives you a live view of all of the cameras that you have running. So when they're all on, I can see, whoever's in whatever room. You can also set the display output just to show one camera. So if I only, if I'm just tracking a singer in the vocal booth and I just want to see them, then I can just switch it to just be that camera, and then I don't have to look at myself in the control room at the same time. But if I've got multiple things, if I've got a singer in the booth, but a drummer or whatever in the live room, I can view both cameras at the same time. So it's really handy for that sort of thing. But further to that, the Pro ISO model can also simultaneously record to an SSD drive, record all 4 camera outputs simultaneously with audio, so camera audio from each camera, as well as those 2 line and mic inputs. When I have people in the studio, I can record all the cameras, and I can also record all the audio. I can send what's coming out of Pro Tools out from my RME, send it out of Total Mix Effects into my Atem, so it will record video from Pro Tools, and I could cut the video live, and it'll give you a program output, as it's called, which will be like the live cut that you've done. But it also gives you all the individual camera outputs, so you can go and re-edit things. And if you use DaVinci Resolve, which is Blackmagic's video editing software, Blackmagic who make the Atem Mini, it gives you a DaVinci Resolve project file with all the cuts that you've made live, but you can go in and tweak those and change them. But essentially what all this means is that when I have artists in the studio, not only can I use the cameras for just monitoring things and being able to see people, I can also record what those cameras are seeing and offer some video content to my clients, which at the moment I just sort of do as a free extra for clients, but is also something that I could upcharge for and add as an additional service. And that is what we did at my old studio. We did live streams, so you can live stream with this thing as well, either straight from the Atem itself or into a computer through OBS or something like that. So really, really versatile unit that has just kind of helped me so much. So yeah, I'd definitely recommend the Atem Mini. So I think that about wraps this video up. Sound out down in the comments below if you enjoyed the video, if there's anything that you've bought that you've been really happy with that you would recommend to other people, particularly any sort of bargains, hidden gems or anything like that. Let us know down in the comments down below. Subscribe to the channel as well if you enjoyed the video. That really helps me out. I'd really appreciate it. This channel is still growing. Any support is always appreciated. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let us know if you did, and I'm sure I could do plenty more of these, make a little mini series out of it or something, and I'd definitely be interested in doing a video on some of the regret purchases that I've made over the years. Yeah, anyway, I will see you guys again in the next one.